Let me tell you about the moment I watched a grown woman's entire world crumble at gate B17. Picture this. A packed terminal at Chicago O'Hare, dozens of passengers waiting to board, and this woman, let's call her Karen, standing there with what she thought was a first-class ticket, screaming at me to give up my window seat. But here's the thing. Her ticket wasn't just wrong. It was completely fake. And when airport security pulled up her actual booking information on their tablet, the look on her face. Pure, absolute horror. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Because what happened next, the collective reaction from every single passenger in that boarding area, was something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. But to understand how we got to that moment, I need to take you back to the beginning of what should have been a simple Tuesday morning flight from Chicago to Phoenix. My name is Patricia, and at 58 years old, I thought I'd seen it all. 23 years as a high school principal will do that to you. You learn to spot entitled behavior from a mile away. You develop a sixth sense for when someone's about to make a scene, when a parent thinks their money can buy their child a passing grade, or when someone believes the rules simply don't apply to them. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on flight 447 that day. I was traveling to Phoenix to see my daughter Sarah and my two grandkids, Emma, who's 7, and little Jake, who just turned 4. Sarah had been going through a particularly nasty divorce, the kind where lawyers get involved and every conversation becomes a battle. Her ex-husband was fighting for custody while simultaneously trying to hide assets, and frankly, my daughter was falling apart. As a single mom myself for 12 years after my husband Robert passed from cancer, I understood that bone-deep exhaustion that comes from fighting battles on every front. Sometimes you just need your mom, you know? Sometimes you need that person who's been in your corner since day one to remind you that you're stronger than you think. I'd splurged on a window seat 14A to be exact, and let me tell you, this was a big deal for me. After years of cramped middle seats, dealing with other people's elbows in my ribs, and passengers who seemed to think the armrest was exclusively theirs, I figured I'd earned the right to watch the clouds roll by in peace. Plus, my arthritis had been acting up something fierce lately. Those cold Chicago mornings had been particularly brutal on my joints, and I knew I'd need that window to lean against during the 3-hour flight. The extra $35 felt like a luxury, but at my age, comfort isn't a luxury anymore, it's a necessity. The morning started normal enough. I got to O'Hare 2 hours early, like I always do. Call me old-fashioned, but I believe in being punctual. My mother raised me to believe that being on time shows respect for other people, and that lesson stuck. I navigated through security with the practiced ease of someone who's done this dance too many times. Shoes off, laptop out, small bottles in the designated baggie. The TSA agent, a friendly woman about my age, complimented my sensible travel outfit, comfortable walking shoes, stretchy pants, and a cardigan with deep pockets for all my essentials. I grabbed my usual black coffee from the Starbucks near gate B15, no cream, no sugar, just the way Robert used to drink it, and found a quiet spot near gate B17 to people watch while I waited. There's something oddly comforting about airports, you know? All these people with their own stories, their own destinations, their own reasons for being exactly where they're at exactly this moment. I pulled out my well-worn paperback mystery novel and settled in for what I expected to be a peaceful hour before boarding. That's when I first spotted her. She was impossible to miss, really. Designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, one of those quilted Chanel things with the gold chain that I'd only ever seen in magazines. Her outfit screamed money, perfectly tailored blazer, shoes that probably had Italian names I couldn't pronounce, and jewelry that caught the fluorescent airport lighting like tiny spotlights. Her blonde hair was styled in that way that looks effortless but probably took an hour and $100 at some high-end salon. But it wasn't her appearance that caught my attention, it was her behavior. She was pacing back and forth near the gate counter like a caged animal, occasionally stopping to tap her perfectly manicured nails against her phone screen while glaring at the airline staff. Every few minutes, she'd check her expensive watch with the kind of exaggerated gesture that was clearly meant to be noticed. The gate agents were doing their best to ignore her obvious impatience, but I could see the tension in their shoulders, that familiar stress response I recognized from dealing with difficult parents during my principal years. I remember thinking to myself, Patricia, you've dealt with people like this for over 2 decades. You know exactly how this goes. Stay in your lane, mind your own business, and maybe you'll actually have a peaceful flight for once. But that's when everything changed. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom with that distinctive airline tone, "Good morning, passengers. We're now beginning boarding for Flight 447 with service to Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. We're now inviting our first-class passengers and passengers needing special assistance to begin boarding." I wasn't in first class. My teacher's pension didn't stretch quite that far, but I had managed to snag a spot in Group A, which meant I'd board with the second wave. I gathered my carry-on, just a small black duffel bag with some clothes for the week and carefully wrapped gifts for the grandkids that I'd spent hours selecting. Emma was going through a unicorn phase, so I'd found this beautiful stuffed unicorn with a rainbow mane. For Jake, I'd picked out a set of wooden trucks because he was obsessed with construction vehicles and could spend hours making beep-beep noises while pushing them around. As the line began forming, I made my way toward the gate, fishing my boarding pass out of the front pocket of my purse where I always kept it for easy access. That's when she approached me. "Excuse me," she said, and I have to give her credit, her voice started with what could generously be called fake sweetness, though it had an underlying edge that immediately put me on alert. It was the same tone I'd heard from parents who were about to demand their child's grade be changed, or who wanted me to make an exception to school policy just for them. I looked up from my boarding pass to find her standing directly in my path, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, something floral and overwhelming that probably cost more per ounce than I spent on groceries in a week. "I believe you're in my seat," she continued, her smile as artificial as the sweetener in diet soda. I looked down at my boarding pass, then back at her, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" She thrust her phone toward my face with the kind of aggressive gesture that made me instinctively take a step back. On her screen was what appeared to be a boarding pass, though something about it looked off. The resolution seemed strange, and the colors didn't quite match the boarding pass I was holding in my hand. "Seat 14, a window seat," she announced with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged in her life. "I specifically requested it because I have a medical condition that requires me to sit by the window. Something about air pressure in my inner ear. It's very serious. Now, I've heard every excuse in the book. 23 years of my dog ate my homework. I was too sick to take the test, and the computer deleted my essay had given me a pretty well-tuned radar for nonsense." Something about her story didn't add up. The way her eyes darted to the left when she mentioned the medical condition, the slightly rehearsed quality of her explanation, these were tells I'd learned to recognize after decades of dealing with creative teenagers. "Ma'am," I said as politely as I could manage, "I have seat 14 right here on my boarding pass." I held up my printed ticket, the paper still crisp from when I'd printed it at home the night before. "Perhaps you could check with the gate agent? I'm sure they can sort out any confusion." Her entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The fake sweetness evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun, replaced by something cold and sharp that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was like watching someone remove a mask to reveal something ugly underneath. "Listen, lady," she said, and the way she pronounced lady made it sound like an insult. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but I paid extra for that window seat. I have platinum status with this airline. Do you know what that means? It means I fly over 100,000 miles a year. It means I'm not about to let some random passenger take what's rightfully mine." The way she said random passenger hit me like a slap. There was such disdain in her voice, such casual dismissal of my worth as a human being. It was the same tone I'd heard from wealthy parents who thought their donation to the school's fundraiser gave them the right to treat teachers and staff like servants. I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest, the same feeling I'd get when dealing with particularly difficult parents who thought their money could buy their child a passing grade, or who believed that screaming loud enough would make the rules bend in their favor. But I'd learned over the years that losing your temper never solved anything. In fact, it usually made things worse. "I understand your frustration," I replied, keeping my voice level and professional, the same tone I'd used countless times when de-escalating tense situations in my office. "But I have a valid boarding pass for seat 14A. If there's been some kind of mix-up, the gate agent can definitely sort it out. They're very helpful." That's when she really let me have it. "Mix up? Miss up?" Her voice rose to a pitch that made several nearby passengers turn and stare. A businessman reading his newspaper looked up with raised eyebrows. A young mother with a toddler instinctively pulled her child closer. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know how much money I spend with this airline every year? I could buy and sell you 10 times over." I wanted to respond, Lord knows I had plenty to say about people who think their bank account gives them the right to treat others poorly. But something told me to wait. In my experience, people like this usually reveal their true colors if you give them enough rope. They can't help themselves. Their sense of entitlement is so deeply ingrained that they'll eventually say something that exposes them completely. And boy, was I right. You know what? She continued, her voice getting louder and more shrill with each word. By now, she'd attracted the attention of at least 20 other passengers, and more were turning to watch the spectacle unfold. This is exactly what's wrong with flying these days. They let just anybody on these planes, and then people like you think you can just waltz in here and take seats from paying customers who actually deserve them. The way she emphasized you made it clear this wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about something deeper, some toxic sense of entitlement that ran bone deep, some belief that her perceived status made her inherently more deserving than everyone else around her. I could see other passengers exchanging glances, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. An elderly gentleman in a veteran's cap shook his head disapprovingly. A group of college students had their phones out, clearly recording the scene. A flight attendant walking by slowed her pace, obviously trying to assess whether she needed to intervene. "Ma'am," I said, drawing on every ounce of patience I developed over my decades in education, "I really think we should let the airline staff handle this situation. They're trained to deal with seating issues." But she wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting started. "Handle this situation? Handle this situation?" She was practically screaming now, her face flushed red with rage. Spittle was forming at the corners of her mouth. "The only thing that needs to be handled is you getting out of my seat and learning your place." Learning my place. Those words hit me like a physical blow. In all my years dealing with difficult people, I'd rarely encountered such naked arrogance, such casual cruelty. This woman didn't just want my seat, she wanted to humiliate me, to put me in what she considered my proper position in some imaginary hierarchy where her money made her better than everyone else. That's when she made her first big mistake. She grabbed my arm. Her manicured nails dug into my cardigan, and I felt her grip tighten on my forearm with surprising strength. The physical contact sent a shock through my system, not just the surprise of it, but the violation. In all my years as a principal, dealing with angry parents and volatile situations, I'd learned that once someone crosses the line into physical contact, the entire dynamic changes. Now, I don't know about you, but in my day, we were taught to keep our hands to ourselves. It was one of the first lessons we learned in kindergarten, right along with sharing and using indoor voices. And after dealing with aggressive parents for over 2 decades, I had zero tolerance for people who thought they could intimidate me with physical contact. "Ma'am," I said, pulling my arm free with more force than I'd intended and raising my voice just enough to be heard clearly by everyone in the immediate area, "I need you to not touch me. And I need you to lower your voice immediately." But instead of backing down, instead of recognizing that she'd crossed a serious line, she doubled down with the kind of reckless abandon that only comes from someone who's never faced real consequences for their actions. "Don't tell me what to do," she shrieked, her voice reaching a volume that probably violated several noise ordinances. "You have no idea what kind of day I've had. My husband's lawyer is trying to screw me over in our divorce. His forensic accountant is breathing down my neck. I missed my connection yesterday because of these incompetent airline people who don't know how to do their jobs. And now some elderly woman thinks she can steal my seat." Elderly woman. Let me tell you something about calling a 58-year-old woman elderly when she's already dealing with your nonsense. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. It's like poking a sleeping bear with a sharp stick. It's like making the biggest mistake of your entire day. The crowd around us had grown substantially. I could see people craning their necks to get a better view, some filming with their phones, others simply watching with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. The gate area had essentially come to a standstill as everyone focused on our confrontation. But I took a deep breath, counted to 5, drew on every meditation technique I'd learned, every anger management strategy I'd developed over the years. And then I did something that would change everything. I smiled. "You know what?" I said, my voice sweet as honey but with steel underneath. "You're absolutely right. This situation needs to be resolved immediately. Let's get the professionals involved and sort this out properly." I walked over to the gate counter with purpose, my years of dealing with crisis situations kicking in. Behind the counter, A young man named Marcus, according to his name tag, was watching the whole scene unfold with the kind of barely concealed panic that comes from knowing you're about to have to deal with a very public, very messy situation. Marcus looked like he was in his mid-20s, probably new to the job, with the kind of eager-to-please demeanor that suggested he actually cared about doing his work well. His uniform was pressed and neat, his hair carefully styled, and he had the appearance of someone who took pride in his professionalism. But right now, his eyes held the same expression I'd seen on substitute teachers' faces when they realized they were about to walk into a classroom full of seniors on the last day before spring break. "Excuse me, Marcus," I said, reading his name tag and speaking in my most professional principal voice. "This lady and I seem to have been assigned the same seat. Could you help us figure out what's going on? I'm sure it's just a simple computer error that you can sort out quickly." Marcus looked relieved to have something constructive to focus on, a concrete problem he could actually solve instead of just watching a confrontation escalate. "Of course, I'd be happy to help. May I see both boarding passes?" I handed over my printed ticket, the paper slightly warm from being clutched in my hand, but still crisp and clearly legible. Karen, meanwhile, was fumbling with her phone, swiping and tapping frantically. Her hands were shaking slightly, whether from anger or something else, I couldn't tell. "Here," she said, practically shoving the device in Marcus's face with such force that he had to lean back to avoid getting hit. "Seat 14, a first-class upgrade. Platinum status. I specifically requested this seat because of my medical condition." Marcus took her phone carefully, studying the screen with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was seeing something that didn't look quite right. His eyebrows furrowed as he looked at her screen, then at my boarding pass, then back at her screen again. He tilted the phone slightly, catching the light from different angles. "Ma'am," he said carefully, with the diplomatic tone of someone who's been trained to deliver bad news gently, "this appears to be a screenshot of a boarding pass, not an actual mobile boarding pass from our app." The color drained from Karen's face so quickly I thought she might faint. What do you mean?" "Well," Marcus continued, pulling up something on his computer terminal while speaking in the patient, educational tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone who really should already know it. "When you check in through our mobile app, you get a digital boarding pass with a scannable QR code that updates in real time. It has security features and connects directly to our system. This looks like, well, it looks like a photograph of a boarding pass, possibly from an email confirmation." The boarding area had gone completely silent. Even the CNN news feed playing on the overhead monitors seemed quieter. The usual airport background noise, rolling suitcases, conversations, gate announcements had faded into nothing as everyone within earshot focused on our little drama. It was like being in the eye of a hurricane, that eerie calm that comes right before everything falls apart. "That's ridiculous," Karen sputtered, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I screenshotted it so I wouldn't lose it. That's what you're supposed to do, right? That's what everyone does." But Marcus was already typing on his keyboard, his fingers moving quickly across the keys with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this search hundreds of times. I could see his expression changing as information populated his screen, confusion giving way to concern deepening into something that looked almost like alarm. "Ma'am, could you please tell me your confirmation number?" he asked, his voice taking on a more official tone. Karen's hands were shaking more noticeably now as she scrolled through her phone, swiping frantically through screens and apps like someone looking for car keys when they're already late for an important appointment. It's here somewhere. I know I have it." She was starting to panic, and I could see it in her body language, the way her shoulders hunched forward, the rapid, shallow breathing, the way her eyes darted around as if looking for an escape route. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like guilt. That's when Marcus dropped the bombshell that would change everything. "Ma'am," he said quietly, but in the absolute silence of the boarding area, his words carried like a gunshot, "I'm not showing any active reservation under your name on this flight." "Actually," said a distinguished man in a navy business suit who'd been sitting near the gate reading the Wall Street Journal, "I watched this whole thing from the beginning. She never asked nicely for anything. She demanded the seat, got aggressive when she was politely refused, and then physically grabbed this lady's arm. I saw it too," chimed in a young woman with a toddler balanced on her hip, her voice carrying the authority of a mother who'd broken up plenty of playground disputes. "She was incredibly rude from the very first word. And she kept changing her story about why she needed the seat. And she called her elderly, added a teenager with purple hair and multiple piercings, her voice indignant in the way that only teenagers can manage. That was totally uncool. Like, seriously not okay. More voices joined the chorus, each person adding their own observation. She said she had a medical condition, then said it was because of her platinum status, then said it was because she paid extra. Her story kept changing every time someone questioned her. I saw her grab the lady's arm. That's assault where I come from. She was screaming at everyone and making a scene for no reason. The way she talked to that nice young man behind the counter was completely unacceptable. I've been watching her pace around here for an hour acting entitled and rude. Marcus held up his hand for quiet, and I noticed that his earlier nervousness seemed to have been replaced by a kind of calm confidence. Having the support of multiple witnesses had clearly strengthened his resolve to handle this situation properly. Just then, 2 airport security officers approached the gate area. I recognized the older officer, a kind-looking African-American woman named Janet, whose name tag identified her as a supervisor. I'd actually chatted with her earlier while waiting for my flight, when she'd complimented my sensible travel shoes and we'd bonded over our shared experiences dealing with difficult people in our respective jobs. "What seems to be the problem here?" Janet asked, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who dealt with every possible airport crisis over many years of service. Marcus quickly and professionally explained the situation: the seat dispute, the screenshot boarding pass, the lack of any valid reservation, and Karen's increasingly erratic behavior. Throughout his explanation, Karen stood there looking like a deer caught in headlights, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Ma'am," Janet said to Karen, her tone firm but not unkind, "I'm going to need to see some identification and your actual boarding documentation." I showed them my boarding pass. Karen shrieked, but her voice sounded hollow now, desperate. "No ma'am," Marcus interjected politely but firmly. "You showed us a screenshot of what appeared to be an old booking confirmation. There's a significant difference between that and valid travel documentation." Janet pulled out a tablet and started typing, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, she looked up with an expression I recognized from my principal days: the look you get when you've caught a student in a lie so ridiculous, so easily disproven, that you almost feel sorry for them. "Almost. Ma'am," Janet said, her voice taking on the official tone of someone delivering legal information, "our records confirm that your original ticket was indeed cancelled due to payment issues. The screenshot you've been showing appears to be from your original booking confirmation email, taken before the cancellation occurred. Using invalid documentation in an attempt to board an aircraft is a federal offense." Federal offense. Those words seemed to hit Karen like a physical blow. Her legs seemed to give out a little, and she stumbled backward, grabbing onto a chair for support. For the first time since this whole confrontation began, she looked genuinely scared. But I need to get to Phoenix," she said, and her voice was now small and pleading, all the earlier arrogance completely gone. I have meetings. Important business meetings. My lawyer is expecting me." "Well," Janet said, not unkindly but with absolute firmness, "you'll need to purchase a new ticket if you want to travel today. But right now, I need you to come with me so we can discuss your attempt to board with invalid documentation and your disruptive behavior toward other passengers and airline staff." As Janet placed a gentle but firm hand on Karen's elbow to guide her away, the woman turned back one final time and locked eyes with me. In that moment, I saw something that surprised me: not just anger or embarrassment, but genuine fear. Fear of consequences, maybe for the first time in her privileged life. "This is all your fault," she hissed, but the venom was gone from her voice, replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. "If you had just been reasonable, if you had just given up the seat when I asked. That's when I did something I'm not particularly proud of, but something that felt absolutely necessary in that moment. Something that 23 years of dealing with bullies and entitled people had taught me was sometimes the only language they understood." I looked her straight in the eye, smiled my sweetest smile, the same one I'd used countless times when delivering hard truths to difficult parents, and said, loud enough for everyone in the boarding area to hear, "Ma'am, I hope your day gets better from here. And maybe next time, you might try treating people with basic kindness and respect instead of making demands and threats. You might be surprised at how much further it gets you." The entire boarding area erupted in spontaneous applause. Not just polite clapping, but genuine, enthusiastic applause mixed with cheers and even a few whistles. The businessman folded his newspaper and clapped. The mom with the toddler was grinning and applauding while her child clapped along. Even some of the airline staff behind other counters had stopped their work to watch and were now clapping approvingly. 20 minutes later, as I settled into my window seat, 14A, I couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by a mixture of exhaustion and something that felt surprisingly like sadness. The flight attendant, a lovely woman named Susan with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded me of my own mother, had apparently heard about the gate incident and stopped by to check on me personally. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, her voice full of genuine concern. "Marcus told us what happened at the gate. That looked pretty intense." "I'm fine," I told her, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Just glad it all worked out in the end." "Well," Susan said with a knowing grin, "between you and me, passengers have been talking about nothing else since they boarded. You've got quite a fan club back there. The gentleman in 12C said to tell you that you handled yourself like a real lady, and the woman in 15B wants to know if you have any tips for dealing with difficult people because she works in retail." As the plane taxied down the runway, I pressed my face to the window and watched Chicago fade away below us. The city looked peaceful from up here, the traffic and chaos reduced to tiny moving dots on ribbons of concrete. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that reminded me of the watercolor paintings Emma liked to make, and for the first time all day, I felt truly peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Sarah. "Flight delayed? Your app shows you haven't taken off yet. Hope everything's okay. Can't wait to see you, Mom. How was your flight so far?" I smiled and typed back, "Just took off, honey. Flight was eventful. I'll tell you all about it when I see you. Give the kids my love." But as we climbed higher into the evening sky, passing through layers of clouds that looked like cotton batting, I found myself thinking about Karen. Don't get me wrong, she had behaved absolutely terribly, and the consequences were entirely of her own making. She had lied, become physically aggressive, and tried to board a flight with fraudulent documentation. She had treated me and the airline staff with contempt and disrespect. But somewhere beneath all that entitlement and anger was probably a scared, desperate person going through a difficult divorce, facing financial problems, and dealing with stresses I couldn't even imagine. Her behavior was inexcusable, but it reminded me of something I'd learned in my years as a principal: hurt people hurt people. And sometimes the biggest bullies, the most demanding and unreasonable people, are the ones who are hurting the most inside. That doesn't excuse her behavior, of course. It doesn't make what she did okay. But it reminded me that everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about, and sometimes what looks like pure entitlement is actually fear and desperation wearing a mask. When we landed in Phoenix 3 hours later, something wonderful continued to happen. As I was gathering my things from the overhead compartment, moving slowly because my arthritis was acting up after sitting for so long, passenger after passenger stopped to chat with me. "You handled that beautifully back in Chicago," said the businessman from 12C, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "My wife would have loved to see that. She's been dealing with entitled customers at her boutique for years." "My grandmother would have been so proud of you," said the teenager with purple hair, her eyes bright with admiration. "She always taught me to stand up for myself but never to be cruel about it. You were like the perfect example of that. You stood up for yourself without stooping to her level," said the young mom with the toddler, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms. "That's exactly what I want to teach my kids, that you can be strong and firm without being mean or petty." "I work in customer service," said a middle-aged woman I hadn't noticed during the flight. "What you did back there, how you handled that situation, that's going to inspire me the next time I have to deal with someone like that. Thank you." As I walked through the Phoenix airport toward baggage claim, my small duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I realized something important. This hadn't really been about a seat at all. It had been about respect. About common decency. About the way we treat each other when we think no one important is watching. About the difference between demanding what you want and asking for what you need. Karen had made the fundamental mistake of thinking that her perceived status, her money, her platinum membership, her loud voice, her willingness to make threats entitled her to treat other people poorly. She had forgotten the basic truth that our mothers tried to teach us when we were children: you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. She had forgotten that please and thank you aren't just words, but expressions of respect for other people's humanity. But more than that, she had forgotten something even more fundamental: we're all just human beings trying to get through our day. We all have problems. We all have struggles. We all face challenges and disappointments and frustrations. And a little kindness or even just basic politeness can go a long way toward making the world a slightly better place for everyone.